All right, Mayor Cote, looks like we're live and we're ready to start the meeting when you are.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order our regular open Mayor's Council meeting. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded and traditional territories of the Halkomelem, Semiahmoo, and Squamish-speaking people. These refer to the language groups that are more widely encompass the Indigenous people of many nations who use and continue to be on the lands and territories in which TransLink operates and works on. So good morning, everyone. If I can just confirm with our clerk that attendance has been able to maintain for this morning's meeting.
Yes, Chair Cote.
Okay, and Mike, the live stream is up and running and everything's good with that?
It is.
Okay, wonderful. Well, happy April 1st, everyone, this morning. My daughters this morning spent a lot of time sending me lots of articles about Zoom pranks, and I think we're quite disappointed that I didn't plan to have any fun this morning. So I guess you guys are lucky that my daughters weren't able to convince me to have too much fun today. So we'll start just with the adoption of the agenda.
Move adoption.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. And if we can approve the minutes of our February 25th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Okay, we're going to move on to public delegations. We have one public delegate this morning, Connie Hubbs, and Mike, if you can coordinate to introduce Connie.
For sure, Ms. Hubbs, we've just joined you. Are you able to hear us through your connection?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Over to you, Mayor
That's
Cote.
one.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
welcome, Connie.
Thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to address some ideas on transit and how I think we can improve it and attract more ridership. The main job of our transit system, as I see it, and using an environmental climate emergency lens, is to provide an efficient system that moves our population through their daily activities, maximizing environmentally friendly options and minimizing the use of single occupancy motor vehicles. As well, a vibrant civil society requires that transport be accessible and affordable. The population that uses transit is changing as our world is changing. We have a rapidly aging demographic with seniors more active than ever before who are still living with declining health and mobility. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic may leave us with a permanent reset as many workers will continue to work remotely and many more students will be learning online. We love our outdoors and increasingly compete for space and access in beautiful destinations like Stanley Park. How do we respond to these challenges? Transit options must be accessible. Please drop the bus stop balancing program. By eliminating 20% of our bus stops, our transit system will become 20% less accessible. Many will give up on it. The tremendous success of the College University UPass shows that cost matters. Expand this program universally. Abandon and rescind fare increases. Everyone wants to spend time in Stanley Park, including coyotes apparently. Support active transportation and reinstate the Stanley Park bus. More express buses and arterials are needed and more buses generally. What can we learn from other cities and the use of advanced technology? New York City uses intelligent transport systems to help transit agencies operate more efficiently and provide travelers with real-time information that makes using transit easier and more attractive. They use global positioning satellite technology to help minimize a phenomenon known as bus bunching, which occurs as fluctuating bus ridership and traffic causes several buses to arrive at the same stop together and no buses at all to show up for extended periods of time. Anyone who rides transit has experienced that many times. According to a New York City planner, this bus bunching was a major problem for both the New York City buses and the Metropolitan Transit Authority. Let's learn from their experience. Transit matters. let's make our system a world leader. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Connie, for joining us this morning. No doubt, public transit systems all around the world are facing some challenges this year with the impacts of COVID-19, and obviously we want to be able to work through those challenges and get back to really having a successful transit system here in Metro Vancouver. And I think you've given a number of good points related to some of the work plans that we're currently working on. So really appreciate you taking the time to join and share with us this morning. Thank you, Connie.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're now going to move on to item 3 on our agenda, which is a report from TransLink Management. And I do want to pass it off to our interim TransLink CEO, Gigi Chen Ko, to make a presentation to the Mayor's Council.
Great. Thank you, Chair Cote. Good morning, members of the Mayor's Council. So today I'd like to provide you with an update on some of the work and upgrades we're doing to improve customer experience and a preview of our latest ridership projections for late 2021 and early 2022, which Jeff Cross, our VP of Transportation Planning and Policy, will provide later on in the agenda under 3.1. But to start, I just want to share some news regarding HandyDART, our door-to-door custom transit service. So earlier this week, we launched our engagement process for a package of initiatives known as the HandyDART Modernization Program, which will improve the HandyDART customer journey from start to finish. And 3 of the key initiatives in the program include bringing Compass to HandyDART for easier and more convenient payment options, potential fare changes that would result in discounts for some customers to better match our conventional system fare structure, and also a potential new registration process that includes a personalized consultation. So we think these initiatives will help ensure HandyDART remains a reliable and sustainable service for many years to come. So HandyDART is an essential part, as we know, of our transportation services that we provide for our region, but the program is facing some challenges ahead. So our data shows that HandyDART trip demand generally increases from year to year, and we know that our population is expected to grow by another 1 million people by 2050, and that our population in the region is aging. So these factors will lead to more demand for HandyDART services, which is why we want to take a proactive approach at this time to improve the service and to manage that growth in a sustainable way. So on a personal note, the HandyDART program is one that I've felt closely connected to over the years. So my first experience with HandyDART dates back to when I was a teenager, riding the service as an attendant for my grandmother at the time. And then in addition, throughout my 25 plus years career at TransLink, I've had the opportunity to work closely with many of our customers, including HandyDART users and advocates, in my capacity as in-house legal counsel. So I know firsthand the transformational impact that HandyDART can have on people who rely on it, whether it's to go to work, medical appointments, run errands, and participate in our region's economy. So we do want to hear from our customers. And earlier this week, we kicked off a public engagement campaign that will run until April 25th. We're hosting virtual workshops, a telephone town hall, and an online survey to get feedback from HandyDART customers, their caregivers, and their families. So to find out more about the project and how people can get involved, I would encourage anyone who is watching today's meeting to visit the site that's shown on the slide in front of you. Next slide, please. So speaking of upgrades to customer experience, so last week we announced that our SkyTrain customer communications upgrade program is now complete. So as a result of this program, we're going to provide better real-time service information for customers with the new information displays. We'll have clearer announcements and improved security measures at all Expo and Millennium Line SkyTrain stations. We've added about 280 new information displays, including next train signs and general information screens on the platforms, and the new information displays at station entrances as well. And you see some of those pictures in front of you. Now, this real-time information throughout the station is going to give customers up-to-date, up-to-the-minute information, including system-wide alerts. And to improve the clarity of in-station announcements, I mean, how many of us haven't struggled at times to hear the message that's coming through on the speakers? So now we've replaced more than 1,000 aging speakers on the Millennium Line added more than 240 speakers, and upgraded existing speakers on the expo line. So these improves in-station announcements will definitely make it easier for customers to get the relevant service information, which is particularly important during any disruption. In addition, we've installed more than 1,200 CCTV cameras in the stations, replacing old units, adding more cameras, and this will improve safety of customers and employees in the station. So this upgrade program, it's all part of our maintenance program for SkyTrain to improve the aging infrastructure across the system, and also to maintain high levels of customer confidence and satisfaction. So last year, we recorded a customer satisfaction rating of 8.2, which is up from 7.8 in 2018 and 2019. And in fact, it's our highest customer satisfaction rating in almost 2 decades. Next slide, please. So one final project I want to draw your attention to is the installation of 16 in-ground bike counters on major bikeways throughout our region. And this is work we started in mid-March. It's another exciting new initiative that we've launched in Metro Vancouver's first step of our Metro Vancouver Regional Bike Monitoring Program. And it's one of the key cycling commitments laid out in our regional cycling strategy. So these 16 counters, they'll be installed along key bike and multi-use pathways across 9 different road jurisdictions. It's going to provide a systematic and reliable way for TransLink and our partners, municipal partners, to monitor and to analyze regional bike traffic data. So the in-ground counters work by detecting electromagnetic signals from passing bikes. It'll count the number of bikes and also record their direction of travel. This data is going to help inform future infrastructure investments and also measure success in meeting our objectives for the regional transportation strategy. So this is also going to make it easier for people to choose cycling as a form of transportation if we are able to make further investments in expanding the infrastructure. Leads to healthier communities and environmental benefits. And also very timely, knowing that the public interest in active transportation modes has really surged during the pandemic, and it's going to continue to be a key component of our region's transportation system as we emerge from the pandemic and as our economy reopens. And so this brings me to my final update for today. Next slide, please. So we're very encouraged to see the province's vaccine rollout is well underway. And in fact, my father is excited to be going for his vaccination shot today. Even though we have new health restrictions in place for the next 3 weeks, we're still optimistic that as more British Columbians receive vaccinations, our region's going to begin opening up more, restrictions are going to ease, and we'll see more customers returning to their daily routines and back to our transit system. So to support the vaccine rollout efforts across Metro Vancouver, I'm pleased to share that we're partnering with our local health authorities to help vulnerable seniors, persons with disabilities, and others who are facing challenges getting to and from their local vaccination sites. So the first initiative I want to mention is that we're working with Vancouver Coastal Health to assist residents living on the North Shore. This partnership began because Vancouver Coastal Health was experiencing some parking issues at their North Vancouver ICBC site. So in response, we offered to operate a 15-minute shuttle that'll take people from Capilano Mall to the ICBC vaccination site. So free parking is being offered by the mall, and the shuttle is being provided free of charge by West Vancouver Transit. This one-week pilot project actually wraps up today, and we'll be evaluating the benefits along with Vancouver Coastal Health and determine next steps. In our second project, which is with Fraser Health Authority, we'll be using HandyDART shuttles to provide door-to-door transportation services for seniors and people with disabilities in Burnaby, New Westminster, South Surrey, and Langley for those who require assistance getting to and from vaccination sites. And finally, next week, we plan to launch a third pilot project, again with Vancouver Coastal Health, which will provide a complimentary shuttle from Vancouver's Chinatown area to the vaccination center at Vancouver Community College. Through this particular partnership, TransLink will help ensure vulnerable seniors and people with mobility challenges living in Chinatown to ensure they'll have a safe and reliable way to travel to and from their vaccination appointments. In addition to these 3 latest pilot projects, TransLinks has also been partnering with Fraser Health throughout the pandemic to make our park and ride locations available for COVID testing sites, including 1 location in South Surrey and 1 location in Coquitlam. And this partnership has been quite successful. There's an average of 450 people being tested on weekdays at the Coquitlam site and about 265 people tested on weekdays at the South Surrey site. And as our province moves into the vaccination cohorts, these 2 sites are being transitioned from COVID testing sites to also COVID vaccination sites. According to our latest update, Fraser Health has already administered about 275 vaccines daily at each site and recently extended the operating hours to accommodate more British Columbians. We still have a long road ahead, but we're really encouraged by these developments and as we move toward our post-pandemic future. Next slide, please. We're also really pleased to hear Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry's announcement last month that post-secondary institutions can begin preparing for full return to on-campus learning in September. Really welcome news for us at TransLink, since students, faculty, and staff make up a core component of our ridership. So we're currently developing a ridership recovery plan. The goal is to have our customers feel as safe and comfortable as possible when they welcome them back to transit. And we also have new ridership projections which are quite promising and show we may see a faster return to pre-pandemic levels than our previous projections. So in the next agenda item, Jeff Cross is going to provide the details of our new ridership projections, but this brings me to the conclusion of my remarks, Chair Cote, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gigi, for the presentation. Obviously covered a lot of ground. I want to now open it up to any members of the Mayor's Council who have any questions regarding the management report. Not seeing any hands. If I can get just a motion to receive the report.
Moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Moved.
It's carried. Okay, moving on to item 3.1, which is, as Gigi alluded to, the COVID-19 ridership update. And I believe I'm passing this off to Jeff Cross to present this information to the Mayor's Council.
Thank you, Chair Cote, we're really pleased to be here, all the members of the Mayor's Council and public, to give you an update, as Gigi gave a little preface, on what we see the ridership recovery may look like into late this year and actually more into 2022. Next slide, Mike. Really the purpose of this update is we have not come forward with any updated forecasts looking forward since I believe at the end of the summer last year. And those forecasts were the basis of what we used for our relief funding, looking with the province and the federal government. We have constantly been hearing from you and from all of our policymakers the general desire to understand what the shape of the recovery may look like, as that is obviously going to dictate how do we respond in terms of the service levels that we put out there, how do we think about congestion on the road, how do we understand what the implications will be financially to TransLink and start planning around that. So today we're going to go through those things and we'll show basically what the trends have been, as well as how we've been accommodating that information and starting to think about new ways of trying to reduce the uncertainty for our future forecasts. Next slide. So as you're aware, as Gigi pointed out, at one point early, about a year ago from now, we were actually at about 17% of our ridership. So this caused us to go into a tailspin and to try and start estimating when that might recover and at what rate. We obviously need to know that both for our financial planning. We need to understand how our current projects are going to be needed and what the timing and sequencing will be for that. We need to understand in our work with the provincial government and the federal government, is the relief funding that we are securing sufficient, and what should our sustainable funding strategy look like going forward. The region is obviously very concerned as well about just mobility options and congestion in general, and what will be the structural change for travel within the region as a result of COVID going forward. So in order to try and reduce the range of that uncertainty and to get a better sense of the likelihood of different outcomes, we've been developing a new modeling technique that Alon Elgar, our manager of forecasting, is going to go through in a moment with you to try and provide better support, decision support for those decisions that you're going to be facing over the course of the next year, both for our current services that we're thinking about, as well as those major studies that we have on the ground, and even Transport 2050 as we think about what the future may look like within the region. Next slide. This graph shows what the ridership trajectory across the system. So this is the total system boardings, weekly ridership. Since the onset of the pandemic, as I pointed out earlier, we were down at one point to about 17%. You see this tracked against the key provincial health order guidance on physical distancing and in regards to the economic stages of recovery. Generally speaking, we were last summer and fall trending up into about the mid 40 percentage points. When the next wave of pandemic cases hit us, that dropped briefly and is sort of stabilized around 40%. We believe that that will probably stay relatively stable until the vaccination status changes. Or if we go into even further lockdown, we would see a restriction of more travel and it could change a little bit. But it shows that 40% are people that take transit as an essential service and continue to feel safe in doing so. Next slide. This breaks out by mode, by each of our transit modes, what that ridership has looked like. And it does give us a sense of how the change in structural demand is playing out, in that the bus services have been the most robust all along the way. And primarily our sense is that that's because they are serving multiple purpose trips. Versus the portions of our system like the West Coast Express or Canada Line that are more primarily focused around either commute trips or business trips or tourist trips. They've seen a much greater drop, as that translates to the ability for more and more people to work from home during this period. You can see that juxtaposed against what we're seeing for bridge traffic, which is our proxy for the amount of driving within the region. We do not have great metrics as far as congestion and driving, but it looks like we're somewhere around 90% of pre-COVID volumes out on the road. That is concerning, obviously, as we have much less travel activity in general because of the restrictions on workplace activities and on gatherings, et cetera. So if we do rebound quickly next year and we do not see a return to transit, then we could be faced with more and more gridlock. Next slide. So since last fall, a number of things have happened. At the time, we had no idea what the rollout of vaccines would look like. So those were just still on the horizon. They had not really been incorporated, and we were just speculating on that. We're still working on how do we translate our projections against when we thought the timing of the BC Restart program would actually happen. We're now basically more pivoting against when do we think everybody would be vaccinated and feel safe to return to their normal activities. Since that time, we now have 4 vaccines that are approved in Canada so far, and we have projections from both the federal government and the provincial government about the timing of that, which have continued to be more optimistic in the last few months, and our forecasts will incorporate that going forward. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Alon. These are the sort of 7 key factors that we've been looking at that you've been asking us about that translate into travel demand. Alon, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So as we all know, COVID introduced a high level of uncertainty in a lot of different facets of our economy and travel behavior, how people travel in the region, whether it's our employment levels that went down quite a lot at the beginning, and since then they've recovered, but not quite to where we were pre-pandemic, to how much people are going to be willing to share rides together in a closed, confined space, close to other people. And that was a question that was earlier last year, but it also remains, even with high efficacy vaccination, how much people will be willing to be in this kind of environment. And then going on to how much work from home and remote study is going to take place when we're in the new normal, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So usually when we forecast to the future, whether it's 1 year or 10 years or 30 years, in the case of major infrastructure projects or Transport 2050, we are expected to provide one estimate, one number that we're all going to be comfortable with and plan according to. The problem is that with the high uncertainty, sometimes we feel like we need additional estimates. Next slide. And next slide, please. Yeah. And those are here in blue. And so sometimes we add a few more scenarios. The thing is that we always end up with only a handful of scenario, and then the red dot over there, which is our main forecast, always looms large. And that's the one point that we are really focused on. That's what we are planning for. The other dots on the screen provide us additional information, but we don't focus on them as much. With the extreme level of uncertainty that COVID introduced, we felt like this wasn't the right framework for us to work with, and it's insufficient. And so we decided to move to a different framework that is called exploratory modeling that allows us to account for this uncertainty. Next slide. So the outcomes of this framework, you can see in the small graph on the left. So instead of a handful of forecasts, we get a really big cloud of forecast. In this case, 5,000 different scenarios that we can explore. Now, the number of scenarios is not the only difference. There is also a difference that there are no red dots in this cloud. And that means that we don't consider any one projection or any one forecast more important or more meaningful than any of the others. Now, how do we use it for planning? What we do is we then group those scenarios based on the amount of ridership in them. And if you look at the graph on the right, we turn it into a distribution. So on the bottom, you can see the amount of ridership in our system, daily trips per day in thousands. And the height of each graph is how many simulations we have in there. And so then of each bar, sorry, is how many simulations or scenarios we have in there. And that allows us to look at it in a probabilistic way. So what's the probability that will be over 500,000 trips per day or below 800 trips per day? And that's how we use it for planning. Next slide, please. So here in front of you, you have two different distributions that we generated based on different data in different points in time. On the left, in blue, is a distribution that we generated early last fall, so around September. And this one, we didn't know that there are very high efficacy vaccines that are coming very soon. People didn't know if we'll have vaccines in a year or 2 years or in 6 months. And the one on the right in pink is one that we generated in early January this year that already takes into consideration the vaccination. The two lines that you see are on the right in blue is our pre-COVID ridership, which was about 860,000 trips per day. And on the left in purple is where we are right now, and really since last summer, which is about 350,000 trips per day. When you compare the two graphs, you can see that with vaccine, our projections are much more optimistic about where we will be once the whole population is vaccinated. So we see this projection as reflecting the year 2022. And we can see that there are a lot more optimistic once we do this. Now, what we change between the pink and the blue are a few different factors of uncertainty. The one most important is how much we think that people will be averse to share close confined spaces with other people which translate to riding in transit. With the announcement, with the post-secondary institution announcement a couple of weeks ago that they can expect to go back to in-person classes in the fall, we are now revising our projections to include less studying from home and potentially also less work from home. Next slide. And that generates the red distribution that you see here in front of you. Now, we just started working on it, and we still need a few more weeks to be comfortable with it. So this is more of a sneak peek. We are still not planning according to it. But what I wanted to show is that we think that we will probably, in the near future, will be even more optimistic about our ability to recover to a higher level of pre-COVID ridership. Next slide, please. So here in these two bars, you can see those show the relative importance or impact of different factors of uncertainty that we consider. On the left is what it looks like pre-vaccination, and on the right is the analysis with vaccination. Without getting into the details, what we can see is that in both cases, the two most important factors of uncertainty are the amount of telecommuting and remote learning and the propensity to share rides, or how much people are worried about being close proximity, in close areas with other people. And so those are the things that will determine more than any other thing how quickly and how fully we'll recover back to pre-COVID levels. Next slide, please. So tying back to the Pandas 4 scenarios that Jeff was talking about, these scenarios we use for our planning and also for our discussions with the province about funding. And we knew that we wanted 3 scenarios that will progress over time, month to month and year to year. And one of them is high, another one is medium, and the last one is low demand scenario. The problem was that we weren't sure where we should place them on the graph. So for instance, the high demand scenario, should it be exactly where we were pre-COVID, or should it be even higher? And if it's lower, should it be at 90% of pre-COVID or 70% COVID or whatever it is? And that's where our forecasting informs the discussion. Next slide, please. So we decided that to use for the low scenario what we call P5. That means the amount of ridership that 5% of the simulations had lower ridership then, and 95% of the simulations or scenarios had higher ridership then. The high scenario was the inverse of it. So in that case, 95% of the scenarios have lower ridership than that, and 5 scenarios have higher ridership than that. And then the medium scenario is right there in the middle, where 50% of the simulations are higher and 50% of the scenarios are lower. So how does it translate to pre-COVID ridership? That means that in 2022, with the low scenario, we expect to have about 70% of pre-COVID ridership. With the medium scenario, about 80% of pre-COVID ridership. And with the high scenario, about 90% of pre-COVID ridership.
I'll take
Next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if we go to the next slide, just as a comparison piece, thank you, Alon. So back about last fall, when we had the announcement around the $644 million in Safe Restart funding, that was based on this medium scenario that was the green line. And it had a slightly more optimistic forecast at that time for 2020 and 2021. As a result of the greater caseloads that we've been seeing through this year, and prior to having done this exploratory modeling where we had the likelihood, we've been a little bit lower than that through 2020 and 2021. What the forecasts are now showing is that the recovery would be quicker under at least our medium case scenario than what we were planning for at that time in 2022 through 2025, but that the long-term structural changes around work from home are quite significant, and as such would be even a little bit lower than what we had within our contribution agreement. Next slide. So from a financial implications perspective, what you see on the revenue losses for 2020 and 2021 were the basis, our current forecast right now for what we expect. It's slightly greater losses than what we had anticipated in our work with the provincial government. So we're continuing to monitor this going forward. If we have a return this fall a little bit more quickly than as Alon showed in his sneak peek, then the revenue losses in 2021 may be a little bit less. Likewise, we had significant expenditure savings that the board and the Mayor's Council put in place by suspending some of the expansion within the investment plan or deferring it at least, making some non-service related reductions, both discretionary spending, hiring freezes, things like that, extending out our capital programs and cost sharing programs. And those contributed to those expenditure savings, which have also been coming in at a higher rate than what we had forecast originally last August. Then in the 2022 to 2030, that's starting to think ahead to the 10-year investment plan, the remainder of the plan. So what you see there is a very significant loss, over 233 million, about 240 million per year for those 9 years versus the 720 million in expenditure savings. So from a financial perspective, that leaves us with a gap of about 180 million per year against a budget of about 2 billion per year. So that is the challenge that obviously the board, the Mayor's Council, and the province will need to be working on over the course of the next coming months to get to a new investment plan later this year or early next. Next slide. So just in summary, before we open it up for any questions, we hope that this technique will have lasting impact. Our peers across the world have been asking about it, the exploratory modeling, and we've been sharing that. We believe we'll incorporate it into all of our major project forecasts so that we can deal with this level of uncertainty. From a summary perspective, we do think that the ridership recovery will be quite robust, but even in the scenarios that you've seen, we're expecting that there's roughly 45% of people that can work from home within this region right now. So that's almost 600,000 jobs. Quite a few of those in our scenarios will probably work 1 to 2 days per week on average. And as such, that will change the peak significantly. And that's what contributes to that major reduction in pre-COVID ridership of what we were seeing. So we'll be shaping our service plans accordingly and bringing those back to you over the course of coming months. Thank you, Chair. I know that was quite a long update, but it's been about 8 months since we did so. So we thought it'd be worth giving you our best information at this time.
Appreciate that. And obviously this is incredibly important for the work that we're trying to do and manage through this. So I'll now open it up to the Mayor's Council. Councillor Cameron.
I have 4 questions, so I'll try to make them brief. Looking at the recovery and ridership graph that you had earlier in your presentation, it's striking how after an initial bump, the ridership has stayed relatively flat despite a mask mandate, despite low COVID numbers in the summer, and I guess optimistically, despite high COVID numbers in the fall. I guess what I want to know is how confident are staff in these more sophisticated projections of demand going forward? How confident are you in the modeling on a scale of 1 to 10? Because it's a tremendously dynamic and complex system. So I just want to get a sense of that.
I'd say that we're highly confident in that there's a wide range. We've narrowed the range, as Alon showed you, there's a 70 to 90% recovery rate, and we're very confident in that is the range. Where we fall within that range, that is what we wouldn't want to make any bets on that. We have a probabilistic, but we don't know at this point. As we start to see the vaccination rollout go forward and we see what the recovery starts to look like, to your point, Councillor Cameron, we have not really had any reason for people to be making more trips given the restrictions on gathering, et cetera. When we start to see how that plays out and people feel comfortable, we'll be able to better calibrate what we see there. But I would say we're highly confident within that range.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the second question I have is, what do we do with the information that we're getting? We have a range. It's a fairly wide range still. how do we use the probabilistic information like the model, which creates this range to make decisions? Because there's so much uncertainty there that, do we pick the medium case? Do we be risk averse and pick the low case? Like how does decision making happen in an environment that has this level of uncertainty? I guess I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think we can't manage 5,000 results, obviously. So, but
No.
Lon pointed out, we're using a low, medium, and high scenario. And we are basing those on the 5, the 50, and the 95% of those runs. And thus we'll do that for both the financial perspective, which is what we did with the province and for the senior government relief funding last year, even though we didn't have the exploratory modeling at this point. We'll use it for that, and we'll also use it for our service planning. So we look forward and say, okay, if we're at the medium scenario, what's the likely level of demand or overcrowding or requirement for capacity, et cetera, that we would need at the system level? What if it's at the low or high end, and come forward to you with what those service scenarios may be, whether it's reductions in some places or actually requiring more services in others. So we'll use the 3 scenarios to base all of our investment planning on, at least for the next 6 months.
I guess what I'm asking though is, you're going to give us those 3 scenarios and 3 different approaches. How do we choose between them?
I think we generally, the medium scenario is helpful to think about, and then you're mitigating against the risk. And what we'll be trying to do is come forward with resilient plans, which we've been using even with CNBC and BCRTC, our operating subsidiaries, whereby they are able to deploy either more services with some flexibility, or pull back some things and reallocate them with flexibility. So we need to be resilient and recognize that we're not going to get it right.
Oh, okay. So, okay, then you intimated that there was an increased level of driving happening over the pre-pandemic level, or that's what I think I heard you say, is that we're up to 90-something% of pre-COVID driving, yet there should really be less than that, given the amount of things that we're not doing still. Do you have an estimate of how much extra driving is happening?
Maybe I'll turn that to Alon. I'm not sure I would characterize it that it's more than what we would expect given the amount of economic activity, and we don't have enough data points. We do know probably that there has been some transition from transit to driving, which could explain some of that. But I would say at 90%, given the level of economic activity, it's probably not disproportionate. Alon, anything to that?
Yeah, so like Jeff alluded to, I think the reduction in transit, some of these people are now driving. We were always very proud as a region that a lot of people that have other options actually use transit in this region, which was great. And now we see the other side of it, that if people have cars and see using transit as dangerous, they don't use it as much and they drive more. The other thing is that we notice and we know that there is a big increase in services to people's home, whether it's parcel delivery or meal delivery and things such as this. And that probably provides another small increase. Another thing that I think most people don't think about is that people usually take vacations, and not a lot of people took vacations this last year. And so all of these people and families that would have been, let's say, last week or 2 weeks ago during spring break in Mexico or the Caribbean are probably around here traveling. And so we have a higher, while the actual population may not increase as much, the number of people that are actually traveling the region on any given day actually did increase. So now we are at about 90% of pre-COVID. And yeah, the amount of driving bounced back a lot faster than transit usage did.
Okay, so then my final question is following on that, is if we have an increased level of driving, which we still think we might have, but we don't know how big it is, there's a saying that the best cure for traffic is traffic. So isn't one of our demand factors, I didn't see it on your graphic, isn't one of the demand factors you're missing traffic? because the price of gas might, you know, influence people, and other things might influence people, but also
Right.
traffic might influence people. And if that's the case, isn't really our task as TransLink or transit operators to make sure that our transit operations are impacted as little as possible by traffic, so that we can be a more attractive option in comparison? Like, shouldn't that really be one of our focuses, foci?
Yeah, so just on the first part of it, traffic is definitely part of the model. It's not, it's an intrinsic part of the mall. So it affects the decisions of people within the mall, whether to use transit or to use or to drive, and whether to go to this destination or that destination. And that's the base model that we have been using for all the infrastructure decision in the region. And so traffic definitely, once the amount of traffic increases, people make other choices, whether it's a different mode or a different destination, or to stay at home. And those are all within the mall already.
And then on the transit side, and you'll see that in an upcoming report, to the degree that we make transit as protected as possible from some of that congestion and increase the travel speed, then more people are attracted to transit in the model. So the more that we put in dedicated right-of-ways, et cetera, or the use of obviously rapid transit, we see people coming back.
And so does that maybe need to be accelerated, perhaps, given the dynamic we're experiencing right now? Anyway, I'll just leave that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move along the speaking list. Mayor Hurley.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. And I know one of our big concerns is trying to get ridership back up to levels that you know that we have seen before. A couple of the things I'm going to say here will likely fall into, well, this is not in the realm of the Mayor's Council, but I do think they need to be discussed. And the first one is, some of the people hardest hit at this time are low income, fixed income people. And we've just done a fare increase. And how is that going to encourage those people to get back onto doing our transit system? And how is that going to affect? Has that been taken into account? And you know, during this pandemic, and I have two family members that I can tell you for sure are part of this, who were transit users 100% of the time. So cars that are $5,000 and under, their sales have gone tenfold. You can't find them anywhere right now because people have moved away from transit. How are those fare increases going to encourage those people to come back? I'm not seeing that. So I think the timing of the fare increases is not great. Also, again, going back to the mobility challenged and seniors within our system, we're removing bus stops, going to Stanley Park, which is massive for some people. How is that going to encourage people to come back into our system? So those are kind of my questions. And, you know, I realize both are probably not within the realm of the Mayor's Council, but I still think they need to be considered.
Thank you, Mayor Hurley. So quite a number of good points in there. So first off, one of the things you said, and I know it wasn't the nature of your question, but we're hoping for levels that we saw before. And I, you know, obviously as a transit person, I would like to see us get to those pre-COVID levels, but in some ways with the reduction in the peak, the amount of people working from home and school from home, that's something that we've been hoping to see more of in this region for a long time, because that's what drives congestion both on the transit system and on the roads. And the fact that we now structurally will see that change, we think that that actually is a positive for the region, as long as we can find a way to pay for it and change and modify our funding formula, which is a segue to the fare increase piece. As you're aware, you may be aware that last year when the pandemic hit, we had a forecast 4% fare increase. We paused, we canceled that one. We had another one for this year at 4.5, I believe it was. In total, we had 8.7% planned for to be able to pay for the services. We decided that cutting that down to a 2.3% relative to the 8.7 was the best we could do to manage that trade-off of being able to afford to put the services out there that we have, but keep it affordable, recognizing that that's basically an inflationary rate and is similar to the cost of fuel and other things that are going up in the region. And that was part of the contribution agreement deal with the province as well, is that we would reduce our expected fare increases for the next 4 years to keep those affordable for people. So on your last point, I think about the driving, clearly that's something we're very concerned about, and we don't want those habits to stick. And that we do want to keep the cost of transit affordable. And I think 2.3% is concerning, but it is probably keeping it relative to your other options the same. We did see an increase, I think, in, as you pointed out, used car sales, but overall, actually, auto ownership did not go up last year, mainly due to the fact that the economic impacts of people, lower employment, et cetera, and concerns about that we didn't see more cars come into the region.
Okay, and the removal of bus stops.
Oh, sorry, thank you. That was my last one. So we are very concerned about the accessibility of the system. What we really are trying to do with the bus stop rebalancing is to actually serve our customers better. It's not about saving money. That is a byproduct. If we can make the services a bit more efficient, that we can put more service out for the same amount of dollars. The challenge that we have across the region is that a lot of bus stops have become very bunched. In some areas, we have them 90 meters apart, which is the same distance, the length of a SkyTrain platform. So you can basically have a stop at either end of a SkyTrain platform. That is not efficient. It drives our customers crazy when they have to have this stop and go to be able to get where they need to go. You pointed out to the balance that we need to find, which is to ensure that we have accessibility, sufficient accessibility for everybody to get on that system and to be able to ride it and not impose undue hardship. So when we look at the bus stop rebalancing, we work with the municipalities, we identify those stops where it may be a community center, it may be a retirement facility, et cetera, that we're not trying to impose any undue harm, and think about those particular situations, but lift the boat for everybody else that's riding on that transit route. And in so doing and keeping it reliable and actually faster, we attract and serve more people. So that's what we're trying to do with that. We're very sensitive to our accessibility community. We've been consulting with them to make sure that we're not making it more difficult for them to use the conventional system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Hurley. Mayor Walker.
Thank you, Chair Cote. Thanks for the report as well. I think it's kind of one of the more in-depth ones. It's certainly given me a better understanding of, I guess, what we're up against. I have a comment and a question. The first comment is around, I guess, follow up to Councillor Cameron, and that is the lack of vehicles on the road, more vehicles on the road. I think the one thing that's missing from it is the fact that a lot of people aren't carpooling anymore. And the example I would give you is construction in our small community, and I suspect most communities are seeing it. There are more cars parked on the roads around construction sites than there ever have been before. So, and I think that, if you take it at a 4-to-1 ratio, that's a fairly big jump in vehicles on the road, and it might explain some of it. The question is, of course, how do we try and get that back to normal when we get back to normal, because they are large numbers. So that's just a comment. My question is around, I think it's one of the last slides. It's the 10-year revenue and loss expenditure savings forecast, and it shows years 20 and 21, and then 22 through 30 lumped together. The revenue loss, I think, is 2.3 billion in there. Have you given any thought to whether, say, 22, 23, and 24 are going to continue to be as bad as 20 and 21, and then starting to, I guess, level out as we get on towards 2030, so that there's some kind of a projection, at least, of what the budgets for those what I believe are 9 years will actually look like? Thank you.
Great question, Mayor Walker. Yes, we have. In general, those front years, those 2022 through 2024, which obviously is of key concern because they're the most pressing coming up. There are significant losses. They're probably still on the average, using the medium scenario, somewhere in that sort of 150 to 200 million per year. One of the challenges, this is relative to our investment plan that we approved in 2018. And back to Mayor Hurley's question, we also had fare increases assumed throughout the 10 years. So some of it is a reduction both in ridership and also because of the fare rates that we're charging, while the province is compensating us for the next few years. After that, we see greater and greater losses as well. So it does kind of even out, but it grows in the latter years. It's not just about fare revenue. To all the discussions we had, even our fuel tax, while driving has been higher this year, it was down compared to our investment plan, and it is projected to go further and further down over the course of the next 10 years, both because of auto ownership rates in the economy compared to the investment plan, and because of the electrification of the fleet, which is a great thing for GHG and for efficiency and affordability, but it impacts our fuel taxes greatly. So we'll be bringing forward really a year-by-year balance of this to the Mayor's Council and the board to try to figure out how best to handle it.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was really informative. Just a few questions just in terms of outside of students, are we able to differentiate the ridership between those who travel for who have occupations more in essential services versus those who have the ability to telecommute?
Alon, do you want to speak to the former within the model? On the latter, we have been looking a lot. Mayor Buchanan at Statistics Canada reports on the ability to work from home by sector and trying to translate that to Metro Vancouver. I think I mentioned our estimate is there are about 1.3 million jobs in the region, of which our estimate is about 45% of those can work from home to some degree. We have better information because of what we've seen during the pandemic, obviously. And then we've been using that to translate by sector to understand what might be the ranges going forward, lasting ranges on that. As I mentioned, I think the medium part of our distribution was about 2 days per week on average for that. Alon, can you speak to in the model by employment?
Yeah, it's very similar to what you said. We have a few different sectors. We have about 10 different sectors in the mall, and we incorporated the analysis that was done by Statistics Canada about how sort of the proportion of people in each sector that can work from home versus those that can't, and that's the base of most of our forecasts for that, or analysis for that, based on that.
Okay, and then as we kind of move forward and we get to full vaccination, meaning everybody has 2 doses who chooses to vaccinate, will we start to look at if, say, larger core business cores like downtown Vancouver, will we start to do comparison of offices perhaps more opening up with looking at the ridership changes?
We will be calibrating, yes, against what ridership that we're actually observing on the system to understand that. And like, for example, I pointed West Coast Express is running at, I think, just about 20%. So we'll be able to see, as things reopen by sector and geographically, start to understand where those jobs are located. The model does have some of that, but to be able to break it out by sector, to be able to refine what our service planning should be and what the capacity is that we're likely going to require for those different corridors.
Okay, thank you. And then just another, and perhaps you said this and I missed it, but what's our ridership in comparison to other transit authorities nationally as well as internationally?
No, we didn't say at this time, and we can bring that back. So we do track against the international systems. At a North American level, we're probably right about in the middle, maybe even on the high end. Compared to our European and Asian peers, we're well below that. And that's partly explainable by the fact they just do not have options. As Alon said, within this region, we have quite a high auto ownership, but a lot of people choose to take transit for either affordability, environmental convenience, you name it. That's not the same in our European peers or an Asian system, so that their ridership recovery has been quite robust or has sustained a higher level. One thing we have been looking at is Australia and New Zealand, who have been recovering out of this at a quicker rate. And I believe the last we saw in Auckland, they were running at about 90% of their pre-COVID ridership.
Oh, interesting. Do we know why?
Well, I would things. Everybody is vaccinated. Basically, they feel comfortable being in tight spaces, and as such, they're being allowed to do most of the gatherings and the things that we saw pre-COVID. It could also be they didn't have the same duration of experience that we're having during lockdown. They had very intense, but those habits didn't necessarily form to change, as Mayor Hurley pointed, looking for an alternative mode.
Right. Okay. And then just finally, just in terms of the fact that, you know, in modern history, we haven't experienced a global pandemic, but I'm just curious where we are in terms of the return to ridership in comparison to other areas that have experienced catastrophic events, such as like 9/11, whereas now, you know, initially they had significant, obviously nobody was riding, but now we see a whole new hub for transportation right next to where the trade centers were.
Mm-hmm. I can't speak to that particular one, but Mayor Buchanan, we have looked at other areas where we saw MERS and SARS previously and looked at the Asian cities and what their recovery rate was to help inform our scenarios bound rationally. I don't have that in front of me, but yes, we are looking at that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Froese.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. It's a good modern day crystal ball. So what it looks like to me, it's certainly our best guess on what's going to happen. I have a question regarding road traffic. I know anecdotally, my road traffic has decreased by at least a third over last year by the odometer in my vehicle. So I know it's down a lot, but you say that the traffic's down to about 90% of pre-COVID. Are we still seeing the congestion at the peak periods, or is it spread out more? Are we seeing less congestion, even though 90% less congestion because vehicles aren't traveling so much in the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour? So just wonder if you have that data.
We do not have great congestion data in this region, Mayor Froese. It's something we're really working on at a regional level with all the municipal staff using our Regional Transportation Advisory Committee in the province to get a better handle. So I'd be erring into the anecdotal part. One of the things that is important to note across the region, when we see a 10% reduction in overall vehicle kilometers traveled, that can translate into a very significant reduction in the amount of congestion, much more than what you would normally see. And we know many people have talked about how quickly they can get across. Now that varies by geography and what's happening, whether it be if you're on the North Shore and people not feeling comfortable using transit to get there right now and having more single occupant vehicles, less car share, et cetera, you may see even more pronounced congestion at periods of time. So it's not even, but I'd say overall, we're probably having less congestion, even more so at a greater rate than the reduction in VKT.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this important report. I think this is really important modeling work that I think is going to help us in terms of the decision making that we're going to have to go through in the coming months and years as we try and work out of COVID-19. As I kind of see it and interpret the data, it really feels like we're remaining in a bit of a holding pattern when it comes to the trends, and that we anticipate over the next little while to kind of keep going the way we have been going. Really, I see kind of the next big opportunity is late summer, early fall is when we see kind of that next potential shift when the vaccine has been more effective and schools post-secondary get open up and have people travel back to be the next big indicator there. And I think obviously that'll be a really crucial point to kind of update the modeling, and I think we'll be in a much better position to see how we're going to potentially move out of this. I guess the one question I have is, how does that, that important piece of information, which we anticipate in that time frame, correlate with some of the decision making that we're going to have to do, whether that's the investment plan or even just transit service levels for 2022 and kind of the financial sustainability of the organization? Where do we see, given that we're in a bit of a holding pattern now, having to make those decisions with the best information possible?
Yeah, that is the challenge. So especially for our bus system, we need to make decisions several months ahead to be able to do the scheduling, as you can imagine, and making sure we have the right workforce, et cetera. So for our September, what we call sheet change, we need to basically have that nailed down by kind of mid-May, really understand what it is that we're going to do in that level. Thankfully, we have the contribution agreement with the provincial government that has us providing this essential service, and then something what we called appropriate service levels as we transition out of the pandemic and maybe get more capacity back on our vehicles. As you recall, we are running about 2/3 on our buses and about 50% of our pre-capacity load levels. So hopefully those two things will happen in tandem, and those are the conversations that we're having with the provincial government. For example, as they return to post-secondary institutes and people feel safe gathering in classes, we would hope that's a proxy generally for us getting more capacity back on our system, and we're able to right size the amount of services to be able to meet that demand. So we'll be making some of those decisions within the current funding framework for this fall, and coming forward to the board and the Mayor's Council with some options about around that sort of 100% pre-COVID level. How do we best optimize to meet those? And then we'll be setting it up for the investment plan, probably for late this year or early next, on what the mid-22 looks like when we've come out of the pandemic, and hopefully we have all of our capacity back on our system. And as you pointed out, Mayor Cote, we have a better idea probably within the range what we're dealing with. So I think your term, a holding pattern, is a little bit what we're going to have to do and manage on the margins for the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Vagermoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo one of the comments I heard from Mayor Hurley earlier, and apologies if it was addressed in the next couple speakers there. I really do feel strongly that the times like these are not an appropriate time to be looking at fare increases, and I think that not only does it affect those who can afford to pay the least, or at least afford to pay the most. I think that not only does it do that, but we also have the issue of trying to attract more ridership. So I'm curious at that big picture question of where do we see transit funding going? How do we fund our transit in the future? Where do we see that next generation of funding models, and what does that look like? I'm wondering if this is a conversation that this group can have at some point, so that we can at least, because I've heard it, we've gone around the table in various workshops and meetings and whatnot, and we've never really had an assessment of these bigger questions. Do we see fares continuing to play the role that they do in the transit system, or do we see a future, or do we envision a future, or do we hope for a future where transit ridership is not as dependent on fares as it currently is? Do we see us going towards transit that does not cost the end user anything or less than it does today? Or do we see a continuation of fare increases? So that's my number one question, is sort of that philosophical debate of how much the end user should be paying for this. And number two, I guess, is seeing some of the funding come from the federal and provincial governments throughout the course of the pandemic. And if we see any of that in the future, perhaps that could be a catalyst for some of those discussions. And I guess in the short term, are we willing to entertain a freeze, and for how long? So I'm wondering around those questions around the fares, what would be the best way for us and to have that conversation and sort of get to somewhere where we can see this being a sustainable way forward? Because I don't see those sort of increases of the past of looking at 8% over 2 years or whatever. I don't see that being a sustainable way of dealing with the public.
Okay, well, I think Jeff kind of answered Mayor Hurley's question from the more immediate, but I think the longer term, and particularly in terms of the mandate of the Mayor's Council, it's through the investment plan. And I know we've already started to have some conversations about the variety of different ways that the transit systems can be funded, and even the funding gap that we're looking at. And I think it's through the investment plan that if the Mayor's Council want to make some big shifts in terms of that, in my opinion, I think that's the most appropriate and the greatest ability for the mayors to be able to kind of shape how public transit is funded in the region, and how the type of service levels that is ultimately available in the region as well too. So I don't know if Jeff, if you have any more to elaborate on that.
Just briefly, our assumptions when we showed you those revenue losses are now that we would have basically inflationary going forward. None of the 3 or 4%, Mayor Vagramoff, that we'd had in the investment plan. So that's the basis of those losses, exactly as Mayor Cote said. If the mayor's working with the province and the board wanted to look at alternatives to that, that would be the starting point. If you wanted to reduce those, they have very huge domino effects. If you forgo 2.5% right now, by year 10, that's like 90 million a year. It starts to get very large. So you need an alternative to be able to pay for it. Because the other thing, to your point, is obviously we need to give people the options. So we want to make sure that we have a robust level of transit service that meets their needs. So that's the trade-off, and we will bring forward those options for you. I
appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So if I can just get a motion to receive this oral report.
I'll move that.
Seconder? Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Now moving on to item 3.2, which is an update on the printed transit schedules. And I'd like to invite Steve Vanagas to provide a brief presentation on this item.
Thanks, Chair. And I don't have a presentation. I'll just be speaking to the report. I think it's on page 7 of your packages. I'll just give a quick summary of this. As you recall, this issue was brought up late last year to the Mayor's Council. Last year, with so many libraries and community centers closed throughout the region, we were not able to distribute our timetables, our printed timetables, as we normally would be. It's about 150 locations around the region that receive these. So we decided to take the opportunity to look at exactly who uses these timetables and how we best supply this information to the individuals that need them. We publish them 3 times a year in conjunction with service changes that are made. And they go out to the community centers and libraries. So since this came up at the Mayor's Council, we went away and did a whole bunch of additional research on the matter. We did some online surveys. We put up posters at those 150 locations. We talked to stakeholder groups, for example, Seniors on the Move and other seniors groups and other organizations. We took out local newspaper ads just to canvass feedback from people and customers who would be using this kind of information. And what we heard is that most people who use a printed timetable would be able to get that same information on our website, and many of them would accept a mailed version of the timetable if we were to mail that to them. Now, one thing to note is that last year when we didn't publish and distribute those printed timetables, we only received 26 requests for a printed copy through our customer information center, 26. So that shows you the scale of how many people. It's not exact, of course, but it does give you a rough sense of how many people we think absolutely depend on a printed version of it. That said, really important to us that we recognize not everybody has access to data when they're on the road and they have their smartphones. Many people just don't have access to the information. They like to have a hard copy of it. We totally recognize that. And we wanted to establish a way of making sure we're getting copies into the hands of those individuals. So our plan going forward for timetables is as follows. We're going to allow people to sign up for email subscriptions to get a PDF version of the timetable that they want. There's 7 different versions of the timetable, right, for representing the entire region. So you can sign up, get an email on a quarterly basis, and get a PDF of that timetable. There are QR codes. If many of you recognize those digital boxes, you put up your smartphone and it takes you directly to our website where these schedules are available. And we're putting up posters at those 150 locations. So if you're looking for that timetable, you can just use your phone to get that information. We're going to mail copies by request. If anybody wants a mailed version of those timetables, we'll do that. They just have to contact our customer information group. And then finally, we will be contacting all of those libraries and community centers and saying to them, do you want some copies of the timetables themselves? We're going to print up 10,000 of them and make them available so that if we do get those requests from community centers and so on, we'll be able to provide a limited supply of them. So with that, I think we'll be able to meet the needs and demands of the customers that are out there who really depend on those timetables. Back to you, Chair.
Great, thank you. We'll open it up. Mayor Hurley.
Yes, and thank you for that report. I have been getting some calls around this issue from seniors especially, but I'm glad that you're doing the mail out as well, because what I heard initially was that we were going to be relying on people actually having computers and using computers, and there are still many seniors that don't have access to that, so we have to be careful of that. But I do want to draw attention to the bus depot at Metrotown, for example, where even the information there is not up to date. It's right at our own bus loop. I walked through there the other day, and there really needs to be a big effort made to update all the information that's at one of our main bus turnarounds. It's years behind actually, and it doesn't even direct you to the right areas within the bus loop. So I would ask that someone please pay attention to those major depots where we're moving people through. I'm sure if it's like that at Metrotown, it's like that at other places. So just want to make sure our communication is good. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mayor Hurley. We'll follow up on that, and absolutely, the seniors were totally top of mind for us, recognizing exactly what you said, that not everybody has a phone, not everybody has access to a computer all the time. So we wanted to find a multitude of ways of accommodating them. So absolutely, that's why we made those changes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Walker.
Thanks very much, Chair Cote. So I agree, it is an excellent report. My question is around non-English speaking individuals, where English is not a first language. We want to rebuild our ridership. I suspect that new folks that immigrate to our country are among some that will take up ridership straight away. I didn't see anything in here around that particular piece. So could you enlighten us on that, please?
Yeah, typically the timetables are just printed in English. If we are able to, if people call our customer information center, we are able to accommodate some languages and some translation services. And I know when we are doing our meetings, we actually have travel training individuals who go out there and meet with community groups, often in other languages. I know we've done some meetings, for example, in Richmond with the local community speaking in language, and really showing them how best to use the system and how to get the information that they want to get to. So we have to do it on a bit of a case-by-case basis, and we're happy to try to accommodate that through our customer information group. So we'll do the best we can on that front, for sure. We totally recognize that it's a group we really want to stay attuned to and want to feel welcome on our system.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope, Steve, you have your staff check all the bus exchanges, etc. for ensuring the current information is current, or the information provided there. But I also wanted to ask, have you reached out to the cities or municipalities that would show interest insofar as ensuring that we have links or something that you could establish with us on the schedule, so that you mentioned that you have a limited number of, anticipating a limited number of actual printed programs. I mean, I'd like to see that on our website, and then if the need is there, we can have it translated ourselves and provide it to our citizens groups that are in our, once we start up our new, Upper Old Senior Centers and things like that. But I think, as far as Delta, we'd like to be more in touch so that we can provide that information too, working together as a partner rather than just receiving information from TransLink.
Yeah, absolutely, Mayor. We would definitely reach out to your staff, your team, and see if there's a way that we can work together to get that kind of information out. Our goal here is like yours. We want to get that information into the hands of people that need it in the way that they need it. So if we can do that through your team, we're happy to work with you on that. And
I think it's all in our best interest to try to promote ridership use now, once we get past a few more months insofar as the vaccines, in order that we can assist in the recovery altogether as much as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So appreciate this report. If I can get a motion to receive all of the reports related to this item. Been moved and seconded.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on to the final item in our open meeting, COVID impacts on long-term planning. And I'm going to pass this out to Eve Ho to do a presentation.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to wait for the deck to be put on screen. In the meanwhile, this is just a follow-up. Back in June of last year, we brought a presentation to the Mayor's Council on some of the impacts that we've seen the pandemic have on the region's transportation system. Could we move to the next slide? Thank you. So we saw that COVID-19 was having, in some ways, in some cases, positive impacts, in others negative. In October of last year, we brought a follow-up report that listed a number of near-term actions that could be taken to support Transport 2050 goals by sort of supporting those positive impacts that we're seeing and trends that we're seeing and mitigating against the negative. So today we're presenting a first progress update on those actions that we introduced back in October. Next slide, please. So the report is framed along the 6 key observations that we saw the pandemic have on the regional transportation system. And those are identified as we saw the pandemic reducing transit ridership, increasing walking and cycling, potentially increasing driving, increasing remote work and remote learning, and increasing e-commerce. And we also anticipate financial strain for households in this region due to unemployment post-pandemic and during the pandemic. So the report itself contains a number of highlights of areas where we've made progress. The appendix includes the full long list that you saw in October with progress on each of those. And today I will just briefly touch on a few highlights and then pass it on to a colleague who will focus on one of them. So if we can move to the next slide. So the highlights that a number of these have already been touched on by Jeff in an earlier presentation. But these are all focused around the observation that we saw. So they're kind of grouped in that sort of way. First one, rebuilding transit ridership. I think we heard a lot about prioritizing giving bus priority, especially in anticipation of growing congestion after the pandemic. The next one is supporting walking and cycling, something that we've seen an increase of during the COVID-19 pandemic, but I won't talk about that. I will leave it to my colleague Rex, who will give you a bit more detail on this initiative. We anticipate potentially greater congestion following the pandemic. I think some of the data that we've been seeing and that we talked about in the previous item points to the potential for this. One of the actions that we've taken is to advance our shared mobility compass card pilot. And this exciting initiative, how it works is that it will make it more seamless for people in the pilot to use their compass card to transfer between different modes such as transit, bike share, car share, and such. And this will be launching in the second half of this year. Next slide, please. Digital trip substitution, I think we've seen lots of, we've definitely seen an increased uptake during the pandemic of remote work. And we've completed a resources for business and post-secondary institutions to implement effective remote work programs. This is really to support the continuation of some of that remote work post-pandemic. E-commerce is another area that saw rapid growth during the pandemic. And TransLink has been supporting our riders in terms of making it more convenient for them to access their e-commerce delivered goods through a collaboration with Pigeonbox to pilot feasibility testing of having commercial locker boxes in our transit stations so that our riders can pick up their e-commerce deliveries while using transit. And then finally, I think Jeff also touched on this last one, mitigating the negative impacts of household financial impacts by keeping our fares, our planned fare increases below what had been planned through to 2025. So I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Rex, who will talk about one particular initiative that really aims to support the continued growth of active transportation post-pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Eve. Good morning. My name's Rex Hodgson. I'm the manager of TransLink System Plans team. And as Eve said, I'll be sharing with you some additional details on how we're progressing the near-term actions related to rapidly completing 3 to 5 major bikeway network corridors and bikeway networks in 3 to 5 urban centers. So after this COVID-19 impacts and opportunities report was shared with you last October, our team advanced some exploratory work, which showed that for the major bikeway network, there are some really good opportunities to make some strategic investments in new or upgraded bikeways to help move the major bikeway network from a concept to a reality. And for the urban centers of the region, it gave us some insight into how we might want to approach building out bikeway networks that can help connect people to multiple destinations across those urban centers. And so we shared this work with our partner agency staff through our Regional Transportation Advisory Committee in January. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? And so after that, at their February and March meetings, we continued working with partner agency staff to develop a new funding program stream that would be aimed at helping municipalities fill in major bike network gaps and build out urban center bikeway networks, really with a focus on rapid deployment. So it's now confirmed for 2021 that we will have $2.3 million available for this funding stream. Munis will be allowed to apply for one project with a maximum award of $1 million per project. And with the focus on near-term action and rapid deployment, projects will be completed by the end of this year and could be implemented as soon as this summer. Next slide. So all of this is coming together quickly to support projects potentially being implemented as soon as this summer. As we expect, it's very possible that COVID restrictions may likely still be in place, and summer is a great time for people to try out cycling. The application period opens today, and we hope to have our project selected in May. Next slide. So something else we're eagerly keeping our eye on is the recently announced $400 million in federal active transportation funding that is meant to be spent over the next 5 years. This could be a potential opportunity to secure funding to advance our near-term actions for walking and cycling, including rapid implementation of major bikeway network corridors and urban center bikeway networks. So this is something that we'll look to work with you and your staff on more in the coming weeks and months as more information becomes available about this federal active transportation funding. And with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, well, if that's the end of the presentation, I'll now open up to the floor, Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I really I do welcome this program, and I think we have across the region seen quite a shift, particularly at the local level and the shorter trips within our communities to active transportation. But I'm a little concerned in terms of the ambitious timeline for this and how smaller municipalities, given we don't have the same level of staff in comparison to some of the larger municipalities, how we will be able to scale up and actually fit the criteria that's been outlined here, as well as, some of the things that we need to do require big moves and a lot of conversation with our community. It's not as easy as, if we're looking at a section of our network that requires movement or the removal of car parking. It's a direction we want to go, but it's not a conversation. It's not something that you do overnight. So how is it that TransLink's going to look at projects that perhaps don't meet all the criteria, but fill a gap within the area, the local area, and how is it going to be equitable between smaller municipalities who don't have the staff capacity to be able to do this as ambitiously as this timeline suggests?
Sure, I can answer some of those questions. It's worth noting that this is a small amount of money, a relatively small, $2.3 million. Up to $1 million per award. Really, we're anticipating we would only be funding 2 to 4 projects through this. We do know that there are munis that, the timeline's tight, but they're ready to go. And the other piece of this is that this is only a small component of our overall funding for regional cycling and walking. So for 2021, we also have $15 million in regional cycling funding and $23 million for major road network and bicycle funding. So that's a total of $38 million. A lot of that gets distributed by formula to the municipality. So we are definitely, through our larger programs, providing lots of opportunities for everyone. This effort is really focused at these near-term actions, which we want to make it fair for everybody to compete, but really what had been outlined in those near-term actions report is really how can we complete 3 to 5 major bikeway network corridors, and how we can we complete urban center bikeway networks in 3 to 5 urban centers. So this is a smaller piece of the puzzle. It's going to be somewhat targeted and tactical. We hope that we can build on it, and some of this might be able to help support how munis might be able to look at some of that larger funding program and how they're putting that to use as well.
So if I may, Chair, I appreciate that answer, but what I heard in there is that there are municipalities who are ready to go. And so if this is a small amount of money and but it's a competitive bid, then smaller municipalities who perhaps want to access some of this for a project, again, that's not necessarily going to meet this criteria, but you're creating a competitive bid, which means our staff that in smaller municipalities, again, that don't have the depth, the strength on their bench to do some of this, are going to be spending time putting together something that sounds like you kind of already know where it's going. So, I think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that, there's lots going on, and yes, there's another pool of 15 million, but if you already kind of know where it's going to go, why do the competitive bid?
Maybe I could take that a little bit, Mayor Buchanan. We appreciate that, which is why the program even previously had sort of an allocation formula. And there's quite some time to allow municipalities to work with Rex and his team to actually help to identify the projects. And once they're identified, even there's 4 years, I think, once that's been put forward to actually be able to build and spend that money. And we had a competitive process based on merit for a small subsection of this. We've now just been orienting it to this quick deployment opportunity reflect to try and take advantage of what even Rex were saying, is that there is this narrow window where people are trying out new things. So we wanted to get things on the ground, not to take away from the other program and the resources that we put to the support to smaller municipalities to make sure that your plans, which overlap with our major bike network, are being put into the pipeline and funded. That said, the funding does, through our investment plan, scales back significantly after this year until we actually adopt a new investment plan, which, as you know, we were planning to do so this year. So that's going to be a critical piece if we want to keep the momentum, that this piece of scope is included in future years.
Thank you. We'll move along on the speaking list. Mayor Vandenbroek.
Great, thank you through the chair. Yeah, I just want to echo Mayor Buchanan's sentiments. As a smaller community, it's very difficult for staff. And how will you be communicating to staff on this?
So we've been working this through with the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee over the last 3 months. So they're all aware of the process. They've been engaged with developing the approach and the guidelines. And they gave their endorsement back at their meeting in March for us to proceed.
And I will note that the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee, just for those of you that aren't aware, does include usually the transportation director or manager from every municipality within the region, as well as there's representation from UBC, YVR, and some of our other major government institutions.
Just a follow up to that, is there any way we can receive the information from those meetings, please?
Absolutely. The minutes go out to the staff, and so we can ask them to translate those back up to council or to the mayors beforehand.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor McEwen.
I just wanted to comment, I think this is really a great direction that we're able to move forward on. I think it's in relative terms from a financial point of view, it's the low-hanging fruit that is going to make a significant impact on our region. And I can tell you that as chair of the regional parks, we are getting the regional park department staff at Metro are working with Sarah Ross in regards to TransLink, in regards to using some of this funding to further our Greenway strategy, which would connect New Westminster to the city of Vancouver. It's unfortunate that we don't have a representative on this on our mayor's committee today regarding the city of Vancouver, but I can tell you that the Mayor of Burnaby, the Mayor of Coquitlam, and yourself, Chair Cote, are pretty excited about this opportunity. And, we're getting other partners involved in this, i.e. Fortis is going to be taking on a significant portion right now. We're working on clearing up some of the right-of-ways along the Highway 1, but this will have if we could get this Greenway moving forward, this would have an impact on the region as a whole, as an alternate green transportation corridor that could really start moving people forward. And I just wanted to say that the funding is great. We were able to secure a little bit of the funding in my own municipality, and the public support for these things, the trails and pathways, it's incredible, especially during these times of COVID. So just wanted to thank TransLink and let everybody know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes with working collaboratively with Metro Vancouver in regards to how we can utilize some of this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Ross.
Thank you very much. I want to thank TransLink for all their work and staff for this. And we've got at an upcoming council meeting, we've got a TransLink presentation, so we really appreciate that. We're faced with today in our municipality, which is very small, we have increased parking issues coming up. We've got paid parking, but we also welcome the fact that people from all over the region are coming to Belcarre and Anmore and accessing those parks. So we're really appreciative. I guess my question, and I'm just recently being elected, I know we've got some access. We're very appreciative of that, but I just want to ask the question. This wouldn't pick up a smaller municipality like Belcarre or Anmore. Is that correct?
If I might jump in on this, so
sure.
we have on our funding programs that we cost share with municipalities on cycling investment, walking to transit, upgrades to major road network, many of which also support cycling and walking. We have both competitive program and then allocated amounts.
Right.
And that's based on formulas to do with population, although we have for the 4 or 5 smallest municipalities, which includes Belcarra, it's a higher amount than the population would formula would provide, and those exist. And that is still ongoing. This is some incremental funding we were able to make available, kind of some leftover money that we wanted to, in response to COVID, make available for some rapid response. And so all municipalities we've been working with the staff are eligible to apply. And we know that our existing funding programs have been oversubscribed. And so many municipalities have projects that have been on their wish lists for a while, that they can use this as an opportunity to move forward. But definitely here and here, appreciate, we do our best to support particularly small municipalities, but understand that dynamic is difficult for municipalities when some have many more staff working on these projects.
Okay, well, thank you, through the chair. Thank you very much for that response. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan?
Sorry, if you'll just allow, I just want to follow up comment just in the sense that, again, I think this funding and this whole, the active transportation and cycling network is absolutely critical. But I think that my point is that, in terms of the smaller municipalities, lots can be achieved that and applications may go in that aren't necessarily going to hit all the criteria that TransLink is looking for, but could be achieved should the resources be able to scale up. And so it may not hit all the boxes, so might not get approved, but it's going to make a significant difference in our cycling network in smaller areas. And fill that gap. And, from a metro perspective, I absolutely, think that we should be looking at how do we get people to our metro parks and do that connection. But, the 4 municipalities that were listed are also municipalities that are very well served by rapid transit. And so, I think we really start to need to look at how are we making sure that these smaller municipalities are getting equitable, distribution of funding and able to do things that are going to fill a gap for their communities, but isn't necessarily going to be exactly what's needed right out of the gate, because they do need time to be able to consult with their with their constituents or residents, because it requires a significant change that we need to have that conversation with. Can't just come in and take out a row of cars without having that dialogue and that conversation.
If I may, Chair, just one response. I appreciate that. We'll go away as a team and think about some of that perspective that you're bringing forward, Mayor Buchanan, make sure that it's incorporated into the way we think about the criteria. And filling gaps is actually a really important piece. I know that that's high on ours, regardless of where that gap is. One thing I do want to emphasize, what we heard from the municipalities across the region was actually TransLink playing this role as almost a center of excellence to help augment staff teams that may not have the same depth of resources. So Rex and their team and bringing in consultants so that we have economy of scale to be able to actually increase the pipeline, sitting down and saying, okay, here are gaps, here are projects that you have. How can we assist you in bringing those forward and designing them and show up where they would come in your years of allocation, and even think about how you could use that over time and then build it into your budgeting to be able to match that. So that is one of the services at the request of municipalities that we're trying to bring in to kind of fill part of that role that you just said. Doesn't answer all of your question, and we'll go away and take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Cote. As the highest taxed municipality in British Columbia, and that is not an April Fool's joke, by the way, I can't say thank you enough to this special treatment that the smaller communities received.
That sign behind me is there with pride. And we have another application that we're in discussion with the TransLink executive line to enhance walking and cycling. I expect it'll be successful. It'll be an unbelievable enhancement to my community. So on behalf of my community, to the TransLink folks, thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you. Well, I really appreciate all the reporting to us about a variety of initiatives, and in particular the last part of the presentation about cycling infrastructure. I think the really important thing that we as a larger group needs to be mindful for is the current investment plan. The funding does run out in a couple of years, both for the pedestrian and the cycling, and I think this has to be a big part of our discussions in the upcoming investment plan, which we already know are challenging given all of the issues we're facing and competing priorities. But the current funding and program that we have in place is set to expire coming up soon, and I think we all need to be aware of that as we go through the difficult processes that we are. So with that, I will look for a motion to receive this report. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And that brings us to the end of our open meeting. Our next meeting is April 29th. And if I can get a motion to adjourn the open meeting.
Moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And we'll stay on the line, but we'll take a short 5-minute break before we move to our in-camera meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.